The cave systems of Tham Lod in Mapha, Thailand are among the most beautiful in the world. They are also the setting for one of the most remarkable discoveries ever made. In 1897, a team of 6 American explorers led by Colonel Anthony Turnbull entered the cave system. This would be the third large series of caverns which the band would explore together, as they were known to be fascinated with such things and were travelling the world to see them firsthand. For these 6 men, though, the Tham Lod would prove to be a much more intriguing adventure than they had initially expected. They reportedly entered the cave in the morning of November 12, 1897, equipped with lanterns, climbing rope and hooks, 3 days' provisions, and 2 muskets. One of the men, a certain William Cartwright, recounted that after around an hour into their journey into the caves, they stumbled upon a small opening hidden near the east wall of one of the caverns, barely big enough for a man to pass through. After lowering a lantern down the opening, they found that there was firm ground around 12 feet below the hole. They set up their climbing hooks and rappelled down into the opening, and upon doing so they reportedly found there to be a second layer of considerable size below the main cave floor. Cartwright recounted that this lower level was pitch dark, damp, and populated by outcrops and stalagmites which stretched from floor to ceiling. As the men continued on through this subsystem, they began to encounter some strange scratching sounds emanating from the tunnels, which they presumed to be bats or perhaps some form of insect, the noise of which could be amplified by the cave. They went on to discover, however, that these scratching sounds were more likely coming from the first species of creature which they had encountered in the caverns, an unusually large kind of spider, which they claimed would easily span the width of a man's chest. According to the men, however, these spiders were cautious around them and scuttled away into holes in the cave walls as they came closer. The men did retrieve a dried out leg husk from a spider which had molted prior, but the authenticity of this artifact was disputed by some who later saw it. This, though, would be only the beginning of their findings in the caves, for as they continued on, they discovered something which would spark intrigue for decades. After reaching the far end of the cavern, they found yet another clue that more was to be found in the caverns of Tham Lod. In the ground, around another hole in the far end of the cave, were distinct outlines of footprints, along with a rut in the dirt consistent with the wear of a heavy rope. They again lowered their lanterns into the hole and found yet another floor over 20 feet below. After lowering themselves down, they reported smelling a combination of iron and rotting wood, and as they walked through the cave, they came across multiple strange objects, including broken wooden beams, chain links, and some small unidentifiable coins. The discovery of these artifacts spurred them on, and as they reached the north side of the cave, they found a huge wooden cog which seemed to be attached to the cave floor, a cog which they said measured over 15 feet across. This cog had a massive rope wound to its spindle, and this rope laid slack across the cavern floor and seemed to abruptly disappear into the ground. The mud in the cave had seeped between the teeth of the cog, and the men spent quite some time digging it away enough for the cog to be moved. They then began pushing the cog and finally managed to make it budge. Progress was slow due to the sheer weight and condition of the wood, but as they wound the cog, the rope became taut and pulled up a mound of dirt from where it disappeared into the ground. The men then moved to the disrupted ground and began digging it away from around the rope, and they eventually found that the end of it was tied fast to a large slab. They reported immediately noticing something strange about this slab, that it seemed unusually smooth and unlike any stone which they had seen before. After examining it further, the band was stunned to discover that this slab was in fact made out of metal, with a smooth and dull grey appearance. They recounted tapping on the metal and hearing a muffled but distinct echo, further confirming that something must be underneath. It took them some time to dig away the dirt from the slab, enough to begin turning the cog again, but they found it too heavy to lift with only the 6 of them. They decided to return the next morning with more men, and the 6 of them, along with 10 more local men, began turning the cog and raising the metal slab. After raising it high enough to explore below, they jammed rocks and beams around both the cog and the slab to keep it in place, and lowered their lights into the dark void. The men could have never imagined what they would see in the hole, however, and as they lowered their lamps into the darkness, they saw that it was much larger than they had expected. So large, in fact, that only the light of the lamps could be seen in the pitch black of the hole, and after one of the local men dropped a stone into the hole, they heard only a faint thud a few seconds later. As they continued lowering their lamps down into the cavern, Turnbull noticed that on the metal ground near the opening there was some white paint, and he reportedly had some of the men help him begin scuffing back the dirt from over it, eventually revealing the partial letters Ein Sul under the dirt. William Cartwright, who was kneeling near the opening of the hole, reported that not long after Turnbull informed them of this discovery of the letters, one of the men lost his grip on the rope of his lantern and it fell into the darkness. A moment later, however, it was dark no more, as the lamp smashed on the ground deep below them and spilled out into what they called a blue fire across the cavern floor below. This fire quickly engulfed the cavern with bright blue flames, and Cartwright reported smelling a dreadful and irritating odour rising from the cave. In the bright blue light of the fire, he claims to have seen what was contained in the void. Hundreds of wooden boxes scattered across the ground, with ropes hanging across the expanse, and an enormous anchor laying in the fire. Cartwright went on to report that the fire suddenly engulfed the entire cavern below and began billowing up into their cave above. They turned and ran, but upon returning to the surface, they found that 4 men had been lost. 4 more expeditions returned to the caves thereafter, but the lower caverns had completely collapsed into solid earth. For years, both Anthony Turnbull and William Cartwright claimed that what they had discovered was in fact an enormous ship, but no one took them seriously. They themselves attempted to return to the sub-caverns, but were unable to dig through. No further light was shed upon the mystery of the Tham Lod caves until a shipping boat named the SS Marine Sulphur Queen went missing in the Bermuda Triangle while en route to deliver its payload of 15,000 tons of sulphur. The SS Marine Sulphur Queen, however, went missing in 1963.